Okay, so you said this really interesting stuff about Trump and Russia, lots about his reelection, and, well, let's just say things seem tense,
Yeah, there's definitely some tension there.
for sure. So we're going to do a deep dive into all this, looking specifically at statements coming from Putin's inner circle.
Yeah, we've got some pointed messages, it seems.
Right, like one guy in particular, Nikolai Patrushev,
Right, yeah.
seemed to be sending some messages straight to the president-elect.
Yeah, like almost right at him.
Well, let's try to unpack this whole thing.
To me, what's really interesting is how Patrushev is saying all this, especially the timing. Trump just won a second term, and he's been saying he wants better relations with Russia. Then Patrushev makes this comment
Right.
that Trump might actually be in debt to certain forces because of how he won.
Yeah, it definitely has that, like, you owe us kind of vibe. So I think our goal here in this deep dive is to figure out what's Patrushev really saying here? Is this just some kind of posturing, or is there something more? And of course, we have that whole Melania thing happening at the same time,
Right.
which makes this whole situation even more interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's start with what Patrushev actually said. This was in an interview with Kommersant, the Russian newspaper. He says, to achieve success in the election, Donald Trump relied on certain forces to which he has corresponding obligations. As a responsible person, he will be obliged to fulfill them.
Whoa. Oh, okay. He's not exactly being subtle, is he?
Right.
Like, it almost sounds like a threat, or at least a very public reminder of something.
And it's especially significant because of who Patrushev is. He's the former head of the Russian Security Council. And even in Putin's regime, he's considered a hardliner, not exactly known for diplomatic subtleties.
So this isn't just some random guy's opinion. This is coming from someone who is close to Putin, someone with real power.
Exactly. And to understand what he's really saying, we need to consider Trump's history with Russia.
Right, because Trump has often talked about wanting closer ties with Putin. Like, he's been skeptical about NATO, and he wants to end the war in Ukraine quickly.
Exactly.
So on the surface, it seems like Trump wants to be friends with Putin.
Yeah, but then you have Patrushev saying it's more like a transaction, and there are these obligations hanging over everything.
Right. Okay, so let's dig into these obligations. What could Trump possibly owe these forces that supposedly helped him win?
That is the question.
Right.
It seems like Patrushev is talking about some sort of quid pro quo, but I should point out that none of the articles we're looking at actually say there's evidence of Trump and Russia colluding during the election.
Okay, so no hard proof, but there's definitely been a lot of speculation. Like, did Russia do anything to help Trump win? Did they have something on him? Some compromising information?
Right, all of that is possible. What's really interesting is that in that same interview, Patrushev brings up assassination attempts on U.S. presidents. It almost sounds like a veiled warning.
Like some we know things kind of thing.
Definitely. It's a very deliberate show of force.
Yeah.
And it fits into a broader pattern of Russia getting involved in Western elections, which is something we know they do.
They just like to stir up trouble.
It's about sowing chaos and weakening democracies.
So they don't care who wins. They just benefit from all the confusion.
Exactly. And this brings us to Melania Trump, who you mentioned earlier.
Oh, right, because on the same day that Patrushev says all this, Russian state TV decides to air nude photos of Melania Trump from when she was a model.
Yeah.
So is this just a coincidence?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Is this a coincidence or was this a planned provocation?
Hard to say.
It's hard to say for sure.
The timing is definitely suspicious.
It definitely seems like there's something more to it. It could be part of a larger psychological operation to try to rattle Trump.
Wow.
But to really understand what this could mean, we need to talk a bit about psychological operations, like what they are and how they work.
Okay, let's do that. What are we talking about here when we say psychological operations?
Well, psychological operations, or PSYOPs as they're often called, basically use communication to influence a target audience. It's about changing their emotions and motivations and ultimately their behavior.
So it's not just about spreading lies. It's more like manipulating information to get what you want.
Exactly. Sometimes they'll use the truth, sometimes half-truths, and sometimes they'll use outright lies. It all depends on what they're trying to do. In this case, it might be about making Trump feel uncertain, making him feel vulnerable, and maybe even influencing the decisions he makes.
And if they wanted to get a reaction out of him, airing those photos seems like a pretty good way to do it, especially with his personality. Seems like they're poking the bear, so to speak.
Yeah. And that brings us back to the real question here. What did Patrushev mean when he said Trump has obligations? Let's look at some possibilities, but keep in mind that none of these articles actually prove that Trump and Russia colluded during the election.
Got it. So lay out the scenarios for me.
Okay. One possibility is that Trump and Russia worked together during the election in some way. Maybe Russia did something to help Trump win. Or maybe they have damaging information about him, as we talked about before. In that case, Patrushev's statement would basically be a reminder of that debt, like they're putting pressure on Trump to help Russia.
Like a you owe us kind of thing.
Right.
Okay, what's another possibility?
Another possibility is that Russia was involved in the election, but that Trump and his campaign didn't know anything about it, if that's what happened. Then Patrushev's statement is more about creating an image. They're trying to make it look like Trump is in their pocket, even if he isn't.
So they're trying to make him look weak on the world stage.
Exactly. It also creates doubt among the American people and makes them question their democracy. And that kind of instability is always good for authoritarian regimes like Russia.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So we have the debt scenario and the perception scenario. Is there anything else we should be thinking about?
Well, there's one more possibility, and it's probably the most interesting one. What if Patrushev's statement is a form of psychological warfare itself? What if he's trying to manipulate Trump directly?
I don't follow.
Think about it. By saying that Trump owes Russia something, they're forcing him to defend himself. Now he has to prove that he's not their puppet. And that might make him do things that actually end up hurting Russia.
So it's like reverse psychology, but on a global scale.
Exactly. It's a gamble for Russia, but it could work if they play their cards right.
This is starting to sound like a game of chess, but with really high stakes.
That's a good analogy. We're dealing with two unpredictable leaders, and they're both trying to outsmart each other, and the stakes are incredibly high.
Okay, so we have these three possibilities. The debt scenario, the perception play, and the reverse psychology angle. How could we know which one is most likely?
That's the hard part. We don't have all the information. There's a lot of speculation, and a lot of things we just don't know. That's where critical thinking comes in. We need to look at the information we do have, consider different points of view, and weigh the evidence.
Right, and that's what this whole deep dive is for, is to help our listeners make sense of all this complicated stuff and become better at understanding the news. Oh, and speaking of which, we still need to figure out what's going on with those Melania photos. Like the fact that Russian TV showed them on the same day Patrushev made those comments. That can't just be a coincidence.
Yeah, I agree. That's something that needs more attention. I know it seems like tabloid stuff, but we need to remember that this is all part of information warfare. And even something small can be a calculated move.
Okay, so what do you think is going on there? Are they trying to humiliate Trump? Show him they can mess with his personal life?
I think it could be both of those things. At the very least, it's meant to make Trump uncomfortable, to distract him, and maybe even change his mind about things.
Even if he doesn't say anything publicly, it has to be getting under his skin.
Oh, absolutely. And we're talking about people who are very good at using information as a weapon.
So what are they saying by digging up those old photos? Is it as simple as, we know stuff about you, so be careful?
It could be a warning. Like they're reminding him that they can embarrass him, damage his reputation, but it could also be a more subtle form of manipulation.
Interesting. Tell me more.
Okay, so think about this. By humiliating his wife in public, they're basically pushing Trump to react. He might feel like he needs to show everyone how strong he is, and that reaction could actually help Russia.
So they're trying to get him to make a mistake.
Exactly. It's a classic tactic in these situations. Provoke your opponent and hope they mess up.
It's kind of scary how much planning goes into all this. But why Melania? They could have chosen any number of ways to embarrass or manipulate Trump. Why attack his wife?
That's a really good question, and I think to understand that, we need to think about the psychology involved.
Okay, I'm listening.
By targeting Melania, they're going after something that's very personal and very politically sensitive. It makes Trump look weak. It undermines his image as a strong and protective leader.
Right. If you can't even protect his own wife from these attacks, how can he protect the country?
Exactly. It makes people doubt him. And that kind of distrust is what Russia wants.
And we can't forget about Melania and all this. No matter what your political views are, having those photos shown on state TV has to be awful. It's violating and humiliating.
Absolutely. And that's another part of this tactic. It's a personal attack meant to make her feel insecure.
It just seems cruel. And it really shows just how far Russia will go to get what they want.
It does. And it shows us why it's so important to understand information warfare. In today's world, nothing is off limits.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what's the most important thing for our listeners to remember about all this whole Trump-Russia situation and what it means for the future?
I think the most important thing is be aware, be skeptical, and stay involved. Don't just take information at face value. Question your sources. Think about their motives. And really think about what's being said.
Because When information is being used as a weapon, knowledge is the best defense.
Exactly. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and keep asking questions.
And that's what we're all about here on the deep dive. We'll keep digging, keep analyzing, and keep bringing you the information you need to understand the world. Until next time, stay curious.
The deep dive continues. They're basically trying to change how people think and act.
So they're not always lying.
Right.
They just twist things to get what they want.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes they'll use facts,
Yeah.
and sometimes they'll mix truth and lies, or just straight up make things up.
So it's all about the end goal.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in this case, the goal might be to make Trump feel unsure of himself, to make him feel vulnerable,
Right.
maybe even to influence his decisions.
Yeah, and, if they wanted to get a rise out of him, showing those photos seems like a pretty effective way to do it.
For sure.
Especially knowing how he is.
Yeah.
It's like poking a bear or something.
Yeah, it definitely is. And this brings us back to the real question here. What did Patrushev mean when he said Trump has obligations?
Right.
We were talking about a few possibilities earlier,
Right.
but it's important to remember none of these articles actually prove that Trump and Russia were working together during the election.
Yeah, no smoking gun.
Right.
But a lot of people have their theories.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So remind me what the scenarios were again.
Okay, so one possibility is that Trump and Russia actually did coordinate during the election. Maybe Russia did something specific to help Trump win. Or maybe they have some damaging information about him, like we talked about earlier. In that case, Patrushev's comment would be like a reminder.
Like, hey, remember what you owe us.
Right. Like they're pressuring him to do what Russia wants.
I see.
Yeah.
What else could be going on?
Another possibility is that Russia interfered in the election on their own, without any involvement from Trump or his campaign.
So they just did their own thing.
Yeah, and if that's the case, then Patrushev's statement is more about creating an image. They're trying to make it look like Trump is under their control, even if he isn't.
So they're trying to make him look weak.
Exactly. It creates the sense of distrust among American voters, like they can't trust their own democracy, and that kind of chaos is always good for authoritarian regimes like Russia.
So they benefit either way.
Right.
Okay, so we have the debt scenario and the perception scenario. Anything else?
Actually, yeah. There's one more, and it's probably the most interesting one. What if Patrushev's statement is itself a kind of psychological warfare?
What do you mean?
Like, what if he's trying to manipulate Trump directly?
How could he do that?
Well, by saying publicly that Trump is beholden to Russia, he's putting Trump in a position where he has to defend himself. Now, Trump has to prove that he's not a Russian puppet.
I see.
And in trying to prove that, he might actually end up doing things that hurt Russia's interests.
So it's like they're trying to trick him into doing what they want.
Exactly. It's a risky move for Russia, but it could work if they play their cards right.
Wow. So this is more complicated than I thought.
Yeah, it's definitely not simple.
It's like they're playing a high-stakes game of chess.
That's a good way to put it. You have these two unpredictable leaders. They're both trying to outmaneuver each other, and the stakes are incredibly high.
So we have these three possibilities. The debt scenario,
Yeah.
the perception scenario, and this reverse psychology angle. How can we know which one is actually true?
That's the tough part. We only have so much information. A lot of what's out there is just speculation, and there's still a lot of unknowns.
Yeah.
So we need to think critically. We need to look at the evidence we do have, consider different perspectives, and weigh the different possibilities.
And that's what we're trying to do here, right? Help our listeners make sense of all this and become more critical thinkers.
Oh, speaking of which, we still need to figure out what's going on with those Melania photos.
Right.
Like the fact that Russian TV showed them the same day Patrushev made those comments. That can't be a coincidence. Yeah, I agree. That definitely deserves more attention.
It almost seems like tabloid fodder.
Yeah, but we have to remember this is all part of information warfare. Even something small can be a deliberate tactic.
So we were talking about those photos of Melania that Russian state TV showed. The timing of it all is just too weird to ignore. Like the same day Patrushev says all that stuff about Trump's obligations.
Yeah, it's easy to dismiss it as just tabloid stuff, but we have to remember this is information warfare. Everything is calculated, even something that seems small.
So what do you think they're trying to do here? Just humiliate Trump? Show him they can mess with his family?
I think it could be a little bit of both. At the very least, they want to make him feel uncomfortable and distract him. Maybe even pressure him into making certain decisions.
Yeah, I bet it's getting to him.
Oh, absolutely. These are people who know how to use information to their advantage.
So what are they trying to say by bringing up those old photos? Is it a warning? Like, we have stuff on you, so be careful.
It could be. They might be reminding him that they can embarrass him, hurt his reputation. But it could also be a more subtle way to manipulate him.
Okay, how so?
Think about it. They humiliate his wife on a global stage. And it might make him feel like he needs to react strongly. He might feel like he has to prove he's tough. And that reaction might actually be exactly what Russia wants.
So they're trying to bait him into making a mistake.
Yeah, exactly. It's a classic tactic. Provoke your opponent and wait for them to mess up.
But why go after Melania specifically? Why not something else to embarrass or manipulate Trump?
That's a great question. And I think the answer is in the psychology of it all.
Okay, go on.
By targeting Melania, they're attacking something that's very personal to Trump, but also very politically sensitive. It makes him look like a weak leader, like he can't even protect his own wife.
Yeah, that makes sense. If he can't even protect his own family, how can he protect the whole country?
Exactly. It makes people doubt his strength. And that kind of doubt is exactly what Russia wants to create.
And, we can't forget about the impact this has on Melania herself.
Oh, bizarrely.
I mean, having those photos shown on TV like that has to be a horrible experience.
Absolutely. It's a deeply personal attack, meant to make her feel vulnerable and insecure.
It just seems so cruel. And it really shows how far Russia is willing to go to get what they want.
Yeah, it definitely does. And it shows why it's so important for everyone to understand how information warfare works. In this day and age, nothing is off limits.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all this whole Trump-Russia thing, and what it means for the future?
I think the most important thing is to be aware. Be skeptical of everything you see and hear. And don't just be a passive consumer of information. Question your sources. Think about their motivations and really think critically about the stories you're being told.
Because when information is being used as a weapon, the best defense is knowledge. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and keep asking questions. That's what we do here on The Deep Dive. We'll keep digging, keep analyzing, and keep bringing you the information you need to navigate this crazy world. Until next time, stay curious.
The Deep Dive continues.